Buongiorno a tutti e mille grazie all'organizzazione, grazie anche per la traduzione. You can see the bacteria always at the end, and sometimes they are forgotten. So the topic today is to talk a little bit about the management of the malolactic fermentation, especially under high pH conditions. And to talk about this, I want to elaborate a little bit more on the timing of inoculation. And for me, the timing of inoculation, perhaps it's a slight, we have a couple of possibilities. First, it's the co-inoculation, which is the inoculation to my definition, and perhaps it's a little bit a contradiction, 24 to 48 hours after the yeast. I have two explanations. One is that you normally use some SO2 at crush, and so after 24 hours SO2 is bound and is no more inhibitory for the bacteria. And the other one is that yeast already started the alcoholic fermentation. You certainly can also inoculate during the alcoholic fermentation, but normally in our experience the yeast is very vigorous and you find a strong suppression of the bacteria population, so you lose viable cell counts. A better moment is then, again, towards the end of the alcoholic fermentation at about a density of 1030, when the alcoholic fermentation getting slower, or the traditional inoculation, the classical inoculation after the alcoholic fermentation. When I started in '84, there was already co-inoculation, but mainly proposed by the American researchers to acclimatize the weak starter cultures at that time to the difficult conditions in wine. In the 19th, when the direct inoculation came to the market, it was rather proposed upon French recommendation not to inoculate the bacteria during the alcoholic fermentation because of increase in volatile acidity. But I think over the past 10, 15 years, we proved that co-inoculation is a good technique to control indigenous bacteria and to speed up malolactic fermentation, and we can see nowadays a huge application of co-inoculation across the world. If you inoculate after the alcoholic fermentation, certainly the advantage is that you don't have any risk that the bacteria consume sugar, because there are no more sugars and no risk to get an increase in volatile acidity. And certainly some winemakers consider it's easier to control first one fermentation and then the other one. The risks associated with the later inoculation is that you can run into difficult malolactic fermentation, a stuck malolactic fermentation because of the high levels of the alcohol present at this stage. And certainly we have a carence of or deficiency of nutrients for the bacteria. If we talk about the co-inoculation, certainly, again, the disadvantage for the sequential inoculation, in co-inoculation we have sufficient nutrients at the timing of inoculation, and the bacteria can acclimatize themselves during the alcoholic fermentation, and surely malolactic fermentation will start faster and will be finished faster, so the wines will be earlier ready for stabilization. The risks are associated mainly with a high pH is that in case of a stuck alcoholic fermentation, also the bacteria will respect the cascade, so degrading first the organic acid, but then if organic acids are consumed and there is still sugar available, they switch their metabolism and degrade sugars, which goes along with an increase in volatile acidity and D-lactic acid. When we talk about wine, there is one critical pH in wine, and that's pH 3.5. I always say below pH 3.5, the life of a winemaker is less dangerous, because normally it's only Enococcus oeni dominating the malolactic fermentation.
if you go lower the line at pH 3.0, it's certainly a big effort also for starter cultures to induce the malolactic fermentation. At pHs above 3.5, we have higher occurrence of non-Enococcus oeni strains, especially the very dangerous heterofermentative lactobacillus strains like Lactobacillus brevis and Lactobacillus hilgardi, but also Pediococci, which can cause deviation in these wines. But we also have the increasing risk that Enococcus oeni, in presence of sugars, can degrade, attack the sugars and form higher amounts of volatile acidity. That's a situation like we find it in easy wines under favorable conditions, and mainly favorable conditions are high pH, and we can see in an early stage of the alcoholic fermentation, we have already an increase or a growth of wild bacteria like Lactobacillus pediococcai, and if we reach a population of about 10 to the 5 or 1 million bacteria, we certainly have an impact already at an early stage on the wine quality. We can see this that's just some examples from commercial vinification in mainly south of France, and we compared the control against inoculation after alcoholic fermentation or co-inoculation, and you can see always co-inoculation having much, much lower levels of biogenic amines due to the early dominance of a selected strains over the spontaneous flora, which has a higher potential or has a potential to produce biogenic amines, whereas starter cultures are selected for not producing any of them. Another application for, or interesting application for co-inoculation is in wineries which have a higher risk of getting Brettanomyces contamination. And honestly, I never saw that Bordeaux region will consider modern technologies like co-inoculation, but we can see more and more application of co-inoculation, even in Bordeaux, just to reduce the gap between the end of the alcoholic fermentation and the start of the malolactic fermentation, which is normally a good timing for Brettanomyces to grow and produce volatile phenols in these wines. So knowing a little bit about still some fear of some winemakers using co-inoculation techniques, we thought about a new approach, changing a little bit the species and working with Lactobacillus Plantarum, which is widely used in a lot of food and vegetable fermentations. The Lactobacillus Plantarum has also very interesting enological properties, and we can find them mainly in malolactic fermentation in hotter climates. The approach was also to don't have any impact on the alcoholic fermentation, and because of the homofermentative properties with regard to hexoses, glucose and fructose, we also have no risk of volatile acidity formation by this strain. And it's just short comparison between Lactobacillus Plantarum and Enococcus oeni. Plantarum is facultative heterofermentative, which means it produces only lactic acid from glucose and fructose, whereas Enococcus oeni is obligatory heterofermentative, so it produces lactic acid, acetic acid, and CO2. Lactobacillus Plantarum is a little bit more sensitive to pH, so application is mainly at pH above 3.4, whereas Enococcus oeni is best adapted to low pH conditions. The other parameters, tolerance to alcohol, SO2, or temperature is about the same. The approach was, or for this approach, we changed or improved our process of production to produce an extremely high biomass with a high enzymatic activity of this Lactobacillus Plantarum. So with the goal to very rapidly decrease the malic acid in the wine without any or very little lag phase. So you can imagine if we inoculate a high biomass, that's like an extremely high enzyme pool or a malolactic enzyme immobilized in a bacteria cell. It's a biomass which is no more growing in wine because it's applied as a very high level, and you have an immediate dominance on the indigenous flora. So this way, the malolactic fermentation will finish even before the end of the alcoholic fermentation, and the bacteria will slowly die off, whereas the yeast is finishing the alcoholic fermentation. So the big advantage is that
1 minute, Sibylle.
Pardon?
1 minute.
1 minute, okay. That you can finish the malolactic fermentation much faster and stabilize the wine early. So it has no negative characteristics. And just some examples, you can see it was faster than the analysis of the winery. So at day 5, malolactic fermentation was already finished when they started their degradation or their analysis. Same here in the Sangiovese, a very quickly malolactic fermentation in 3 days. I can go on this. So normally malolactic fermentations are in between 3 and 7 days. No impact on the alcoholic fermentation. What is interesting, due to these homofermentative properties, extremely low volatile acidity levels, even in extremely high pH wines. And we could see in Oregon also a positive impact on color stabilization. So we can see about the same color stability as the control wine without malolactic fermentation due to the same level of polymerized pigments. Field of application, pH above 3.5, best range will be a temperature between 20 and 26 degrees Celsius, and there is no need of nutrition, and there is no limitation on the final alcohol level for this bacteria strain. Now it gets good. So thank you very much for your attention.